I'm gonna steal that. What got you here won't get you there. I just stole that from you. That was hard. You see my brain? I didn't have lunch
I
today,
wish I
so I'm
could
like
claim, I've been hearing this a long time in all of the leadership development classes, but it's so true about AI right now.
more so than ever before. So, you know, as we talked about, ad nauseum, I apologize. I got a little bit carried away with newsletter 38 and all the things I learned from the summit, out in San Francisco with Snowflake last week. But, one of the things, a little bit of the quiet part out loud, the technology is so much further ahead than the general understanding, of how to harness it. And there's a lot of thinking that's still out there that's got legacy frameworks written all over it, right? Not just legacy technology, but legacy business strategy, legacy culture. And I wonder, Tati, if you want to speak a little bit to that and the implications of using a legacy mental model for the way business and technology, work together in this new world order where, technology, it's not a tool, it's a system, right? And all this AI stuff that we've been talking about.
Yeah, and there's so much, and we've been talking so much about this, and I think it's such an important part of this conversation because this is probably the red flag that goes up for me first when I'm
Yeah.
speaking to someone about the implementation and the integration of AI in
Yeah.
their real business, right? Because this is, as you know, this is what I do, this is what we do. We bring it to life, real operations. How does it actually create value for you? But one of the things we keep going back to is sort of these old frameworks. So that whether it's like the waterfall based IT planning, when you
Hmm.
look at these long term roadmaps with these 12 to 24-month delivery timelines, the gated reviews, the requirements gathering. And that's not the model anymore. And that I would say is the number one. And that's what I know. It's actually become my number one way to know that someone is not
Yeah.
as connected to this is if they go back to that. And surprisingly, folks that are selling services out there are answering this way. And I'm like, okay, I'm a little worried because the AI reality is iterative, is a fast experimentation that's required. The models learn, they evolved. The business problems, you're framing them live. You're not defining them once and then handing them off to you see them again in 24 months, like, sending some kid off on an adventure. That's not it at all. So like if your data team still reports through a CIO who needs a 6-month budget cycle to approve a pilot, you are behind. So that's the point there. And then you think about the business case first, ROI models, which again a really big thing in all over the business world and strategic thinking. So like this, full ROI analysis before you greenlight a project. You The AI reality is that you're compounding benefits that are only really clear after deployment, which is why and I know I don't need to sell you on the modular, solve problems with modularity, have them come together afterwards, because a lot of this, you cannot spreadsheet your way to this innovation. Doesn't work. It looks like a cost at first. The value will show up later. And I know there's also a talking point from folks selling you all sorts of things, but if they're not talking about that, if they are giving you these ROIs, these crazy ROIs up front without even knowing what your problem is, you are, you're going to fail to start in the right place, or you're going to start too late. And then my favorite, which is the vendor-led strategy, that I have been on the other side of that for so many times, is relying on these major cloud vendors or consultancies to define your data AI roadmap. Sounds like a great idea. However, most vendors are incentivized to sell what they have, not what you need. So you have a lot of folks that still their model is relying on legacy transformation playbooks
Hmm.
that are done. And I know this is a bit of a hot topic, but I know I may get in some hot water here, but it's a lot of what you see out there today is legacy transformation playbooks that are dressed with AI buzzwords that probably AI actually put together. So you have, just generic, the same generic deployments, this low capability build, so if your AI strategy is being written by someone selling services who's never built a model, you're outsourcing your future.
Yeah. So I'll build on that. There's a guy I follow on Twitter, AI Twitter, that his name's Robert Scoble. And I'll figure out how to drop this in the notes, but I can't remember who he was responding to. But he was asked a question about what does AI first look like when you're talking to someone at the individual level? Like what does that person's makeup need to be? What kind of tools and systems have they interacted with? What have they built? How do they see the world? And it was an unbelievable list. I think it was like 12 or 15 different, just boom, 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 boom. And this is a guy deep in the space. But sometimes you have to use these kind of old, and proven, kind of ways of describing things, which is if I want to get fit, right? I want a former professional hockey player to train me, right? Because it's my favorite sport and hockey players are gnarly and yada yada. I don't want someone who maybe has read about all these different things, but isn't fit, isn't an athlete, and maybe this doesn't have the firsthand experience. So I think that's one part that is really important to consider. And it doesn't mean that folks can't reinvent themselves, because everybody effectively started from the exact same starting line. November 30th, I think it was 2022. It's really just anybody can step into this, but you got to have that intellectual honesty to admit what I just said. It's also really tough because there's creative destruction that comes into play. But as you know, and we won't, name names, we've had lots of conversations where people in positions where, and I saw it all over Snowflake Summit, where you would think that they've got more hands in dirt experience, but they clearly don't, because of the nature of the question behind the questions, or the nuances of what they're saying and what they're not saying. And that goes for frankly, and I'll go one step further, right? The ecosystem's not doing people any favors either, right? A lot of these Gen AI native and enterprise AI companies, and those that are reimagining themselves, like they all kind of sound, I'm not going to say they sound the same, but boy, there is a whole lot of consistency in the way they are describing themselves. Which I get it, things are moving fast, but it would be really nice if folks would use more human terminology and stuff that's a little bit easier to differentiate. Because even a nerd like me walking around, I was like, wait, like that's what I was experiencing all over at Snowflake Summit.
And we're big fans of domain expertise and people who get their hands on it and actually understand how things work in order for AI to really amplify those same things. But I'm just going to poke a little further on this, because vendor-led strategy has always been a problem, right? There's
Yeah.
always been, but in the context of AI, that problem is exponentially more dangerous, because AI changes the nature of various things that we do. So what are your thoughts? I have some thoughts of my own, but what are your thoughts? And like, why is it a bigger problem for you to sort of outsource that work to someone that's not collaborating with you, that is not a domain expert necessarily, that's just an expert in frameworks and tech, really, alone?
Yeah. I think it might have been some folks at Claude or Anthropic, but they said something along the lines of, you can't stop the bus, but you can steer it, right? Meaning, this train is moving down the track, and you really need to make sure you understand the game that's being played on the field, and you have your own strong point of view, you as a business, you as a leader, whomever. And you do not want to outsource that kind of thinking or logic, because of the implications, going back to our previous session and conversation we just had about what Sam Altman was saying at Snowflake Summit on day one with these systems, and how extraordinary the results are and capabilities today, and knowing full well how much that's going to compound just by the very nature of where we are in the exponential, kind of change environment that we're all experiencing. So in an area like this, and maybe we're here on the rise up, you got to make sure that you're doing your own homework and you have enough of a sense of things that you're able to you want to look to people for counsel, obviously, and everybody's got their agendas and things, but you've got to do your own homework and you've got to come to your own conclusions. And the good news is it starts culturally, going back to our cultural conversation, is you got to just start doing it, and you got to be okay saying, hey, I don't get it, I don't understand, but I'm going to figure it out, because we're all trying to figure it out as we go.
And I couldn't agree more with that. And I think that there's a real case for you can't separate AI deployment from domain expertise.
No,
And I think
absolutely not.
that's the piece that really makes a difference to this. Why, to me, that you have, when you're outsourcing the AI deployment and strategy to someone that operating under this traditional transformation frameworks, you create several problems, right? So the AI requires embedded learning. It is
Mhm.
not just deployment. So that's the first one, which again, red flag. We had an episode on like the things that you should be asking your service provider, is because these old frameworks assumptions are that strategy is defined up front and it's linear and you execute later and all of that. You can't delegate judgment to in an AI native operating model. You have to be a part of it, and you have to have someone who really has the right, who's been there, who's done it, who understands the old assumption was around that outsourcing tech was that you outsource complexity, right? So internal teams are just like sort of operating an outcome. You have new kinds of decisions that you need to make. So you have to trust. So it has to work in a different way. The rigidity, the slow motion of the old models, of the old technologies also doesn't work with this. And I think that, to me, the most important one, and I'll say that is the banner for me as I think about all of this and all the experiences I've had and continue to have. That transformation without adoption is just shelfware. You cannot have success in any of this without real business users that are adopting, they're iterating, they're improving your AI over time. And if it's not being built in a way for it to do that, and I hate to be black and white with this, but it's just not right. It's wrong. It's being done wrong. The bottom line is just that this AI transformation is not a project. It is a capability, and I think that's talking to everything that you've seen as well.
Totally. So I'm going to try not to geek out too hard on this, but I'm going to try to straddle the line of speaking to the technical dimension, the data dimension, the knowledge dimension, and business value, just using the Snowflake Summit. So one of the coolest, kind of new features they rolled out is something, called views, semantic views, essentially. And so just what does all that mean? It means that when you put all your data, or a good chunk of your data, in the iPhone of infrastructure, which is Snowflake, you can now see things that you couldn't really see before. But those things that you can see are in the rear view mirror, and that's good. But what that means is, like, you can get better, faster, easier answers to more complex questions about what has happened, like the scoreboard. How many, pucks have I sold? How many, shoes have I sold? Whatever it might be. So that's effectively what's referred to as descriptive analytics. But now they've enabled you to take that information and start to put it into other areas where you can more easily, non-technical people can now query it in ways that are more sophisticated and, let's call it, AI enabled. So you can enable these agents that you deploy to have that knowledge from a domain expert's head into their head so they can do better things. Now, here's where it gets super exciting, and I promise I won't go too technical, but there's an awesome company in the Snowflake ecosystem called Relational AI. And Relational AI introduces, as an AI native player within the Snowflake environment, so your data doesn't go anywhere, it stays right there, it's a native application. But what Relational AI now does, in conjunction with those views and semantic views that were just released, is it now enables you to have not only AI-enabled descriptive analytics, the rear view mirror scoreboard stuff, but it also enables you to now have predictive and prescriptive, meaning what is likely to happen next, and therefore what should I do about it. And if you are connecting the dots on this for the viewers, right? The domain experts are the ones that know the best how to tune and calibrate which projection and or prescription is the most effective, and that's how you start interfacing and moving domain expert knowledge into effectively knowledge graphs and stuff that machines can understand as easily as you and I can understand just talking about it. And now you can start to deploy digital labor, aka the agent world, into these areas of getting things done that are not only previously unimaginable, but they're sometimes it's not economically feasible to have done that as a human being. But now all of that is possible within the Snowflake ecosystem, and that's just a long-winded enthusiastic pitch for why I think all that stuff is so exciting, because we're here now. But you got to have that domain expertise, because that's the logic, right? That's the knowledge.
That's super aligned out. There's the plug for, I actually just did a talk on why AI success lies in the 30% that humans do best.
I love that. You're gonna have to you have to tag that. You have to add that to the show notes.
It's literally everything that you just talked about. So, well, we can talk about this all day, but we can come back also and talk more. So we can leave the viewers with a nice, some food for thought. We'd love some interaction. We'd love for you guys to reach out to us and ask questions and help you figure this, help you figure this out.
It's a wild, crazy landscape, but yes, I will see you soon, Tati. It's always a pleasure.